My dad yelled, "We do what we want with our house and our money." After I found the secret while leaving their entire $850,000 estate to my brother, while I was literally on my knees fixing their leaking sink for free. I calmly put his precious legal papers down, looked him dead in the eye, said, "Understood, so I do what I want with my time," and walked out of their lives. 8 months later, their golden child had drained them dry, and when the bank threatened to take their home, they had no one left to call but the son they threw away. I grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina. We lived in a small, sturdy brick house on a quiet dead-end street. It was the kind of neighborhood where every neighbor knew your dog's name, knew what time you left for work, but didn't necessarily know your last name. My parents, Robert and Martha, raised 2 boys in that house, me, and my older brother, Ethan. Ethan is 35 now, exactly 3 years older than me, and for the vast majority of my life, I would have confidently told you we were close. We weren't blood brothers, best friends, or anything overly dramatic, but we were close enough. We'd grab a craft beer every other weekend, argue about college basketball, and complain about our wives in that specific way guys do when they actually adore their wives but desperately need to vent about whose turn it was to empty the dishwasher. Just normal, everyday brother stuff. I am a plumber, and I have been since I was 19 years old. I skipped the traditional college route because, in all honesty, sitting in a classroom was never my thing. I could barely sit through a standard 45-minute high school history class without feeling like the cinderblock walls were actively closing in on me. The idea of subjecting myself to 4 more years of that, and paying tens of thousands of dollars for the privilege, sounded like a self-funded prison sentence. So, I took a different path. I went to a local trade school, ground through the early mornings, got my master plumbing certification, and started working for a mid-sized local company. By the time I turned 26, I had branched out and started my own small business. It was nothing flashy in the beginning. It was literally just me, a beat-up white Ford Transit van, and a stubborn willingness to show up on Saturday nights when someone's basement toilet decided to stage a catastrophic rebellion. But I did okay. Better than okay, actually. I built that business from absolute scratch into a highly reputable company that now employs 8 full-time people. I own my house outright. I've got a robust retirement account. My wife, Chloe, and I aren't billionaires, but we are incredibly comfortable, and we earned every single inch of that comfort with the calluses on our own hands. Ethan, on the other hand, went the prestigious college route. He got a business degree from UNC, followed that up with an expensive MBA, and then embarked on a string of high-paying corporate jobs where his title seemed to change every 18 months, but his actual daily responsibilities remained a total mystery to everyone, including him. He eventually married Brittany. Brittany is exactly the kind of person whose entire personality, moral compass, and sense of self-worth are based entirely on what her kitchen island is made of. It's imported Italian Calicut marble, in case you were wondering, and if you ever meet her, she will absolutely tell you twice within the first 10 minutes. Ethan and Brittany live in a massive, sprawling modern farmhouse in Raleigh, just a couple of hours away, and they drive the kind of luxury SUVs that make you wonder if the exorbitant monthly payment comes with a complimentary anxiety attack. They look incredibly successful. Whether they actually are successful under the surface is an entirely different conversation. Now, here is the fundamental truth about my family dynamic that I didn't fully understand or accept until about 8 months ago. My parents always treated Ethan differently. It wasn't always in a loud, abusive way that you could point to and say, "That's messed up." It was much more insidious than that. It was the way water slowly, quietly wears down a rock over decades. Ethan got the bigger bedroom growing up, simply because he asked for it. Ethan's high school lacrosse games were the ones my dad absolutely never missed, leaving work early to be on the bleachers, while my varsity wrestling matches were always a, "we'll try to make it if traffic isn't bad" situation. When Ethan graduated from college, they rented out a restaurant patio and threw a massive party with 50 guests. When I officially started my plumbing business and got my LLC paperwork, I received a store-bought card and a $25 gift card to Home Depot. Look, at least the gift card was relevant to my field, but you clearly see my point. For years, I told myself it didn't bother me. I built a massive wall of rationalization. I told myself that parents are just human beings, they connect differently with different kids based on personality types, and it doesn't mean they actually love you less. It just means they express their affection differently. I had a whole internal monologue about it that I'd rehearsed so many times in my head while driving my van that it almost sounded true, and for the most part, I genuinely believed it. I had Chloe. I had my thriving business. I had a beautiful life I'd built entirely from the ground up. I didn't need my parents' approval or financial support, I just wanted it. And as I learned the hard way, there is a massive difference between those two things, and that gap will eat you alive if you let it. So, 8 months ago, it was a dreary, rainy Thursday evening in late September. My parents' kitchen sink had been leaking for about 2 weeks. My mom had called me about it 3 separate times. She didn't call to ask how I was doing, mind you. She didn't call to see if Chloe and I wanted to come over for a Sunday roast. She just called to tell me the sink was dripping, it was driving her crazy, and could I please come fix it because, ultimately, that's what I was to them. I wasn't Liam, their beloved son. I was Liam, the free family plumber. The reliable guy you call when something is broken and you don't want to pay a professional's hourly rate. I drove over to their house right after finishing a massive commercial job, still wearing my heavy work clothes, still smelling strongly of PVC primer, sweat, and the damp earth of someone's crawl space. My dad was sitting in his worn-out leather recliner in the living room, watching some loud historical documentary on the History Channel. He barely even looked up when I walked through the front door. My mom was in the kitchen. She just pointed at the sink like I'd never been inside their house before and said, "It's the handle on the left," and then she immediately went back to wiping down the counters. No hello, Liam. No thank you so much for coming after a long day. No offer of a glass of ice, water, or a beer. Just a pointed finger, a dripping faucet, and the expectation of free labor. I sighed, grabbed my tool bag, and got down under the sink. It was a painfully simple fix. It was just a worn-out rubber O-ring and a faulty cartridge inside the faucet valve. It was a 10-minute job at the absolute most. I just needed a specific adjustable basin wrench that I knew I had left in their house years ago. I knew exactly where it was, in the infamous junk drawer next to the refrigerator, the one that had been indiscriminately stuffed with every random tool, expired coupon, takeout menu, and dead battery since about 2004. I opened the heavy wooden drawer and started digging through the absolute chaos, pushing aside old screwdrivers and tangled charging cords, looking for the red handle of my wrench. That's when my hand blindly hit a thick, heavy envelope. It was a large manila envelope tucked discreetly under a pile of old appliance warranties and a bundle of rubber bands. The metal clasp on the flap was open, and I could clearly see there were thick, official-looking legal papers inside. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about it. People keep random important documents in junk drawers all the time, but something specific about this envelope caught my eye. There was a bright yellow sticky note slapped on the front, and in my dad's unmistakable, sharp handwriting, it read, "Updated August, do not lose. August. As in, literally last month. As in, this was a highly recent, and highly important development." I pulled the envelope out. I know I probably shouldn't have. I know privacy is a thing, but something deep in my gut screamed at me to look, and I've learned over my years in business that your gut instinct is usually smarter than your logical brain about 90% of the time. I slid the thick stack of papers out. Inside was a freshly notarized copy of my parents' last will and testament, alongside their full, comprehensive estate plan. It contained living trust documents, detailed asset allocations, property deeds, life insurance policies, the whole 9 yards. It was all neatly stapled together with a glossy cover letter from an expensive boutique law firm in downtown Charlotte that I had never heard of before. And as I started reading the summary page, my hands went completely still. The blood drained from my face, and the ambient noise of the television in the other room seemed to fade into a high-pitched ringing. Everything was going to Ethan. And when I say everything, I mean absolutely every single cent. The house we grew up in, which was completely paid off, the joint savings accounts, a massive brokerage investment account I didn't even know existed. A beautiful, heavily wooded piece of property out near Asheville that had apparently been in my mother's family for decades. The total estimated value, laid out neatly in a bolded table at the bottom of the financial summary page, came to exactly $850,000. Every single penny of it was legally allocated to Ethan James Miller. My name appeared exactly one time in the entire 30-page document. In a small, almost insulting section titled Other Considerations and Distributions, there was a single, dismissive line that read, "Liam Robert Miller shall receive personal effects and household items as deemed appropriate by the surviving executor." Personal effects as deemed appropriate. I was getting whatever old junk, worn-out furniture, or dusty photo albums Ethan didn't feel like throwing into a dumpster. $850,000 to my brother. $0 to me. I read the paragraph 3 times because I genuinely thought my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. I thought maybe I had misread the legal jargon. Maybe there was a second page with my name on it. Maybe there was a separate, secret trust document set up just for me. I frantically flipped through every single page of the thick packet. There wasn't. It was black and white. It was absolute. I was still kneeling on the hard kitchen floor, clutching those heavy papers in my dirty hands, when I heard my dad's voice boom behind me. He wasn't concerned. He wasn't embarrassed. He was absolutely furious. "Put that down right now." I turned around slowly. He was standing in the kitchen doorway, and his face had gone the color of a ripe, angry tomato. My mom was hovering anxiously behind him, her dish towel twisted so tightly in her hands, her knuckles were white, her eyes wide like a teenager who had just been caught sneaking out. "Liam," I said, "put that down. Now." My dad barked. I stood up slowly. I am 6'2", and my dad is about 5'9". So, when I am standing up straight and he is standing, there is a significant physical difference. And I think, in that specific moment, that physical difference bothered and intimidated him more than it usually did. I held the thick stack of legal papers at my side, I looked down at him, and I said the calmest, coldest sentence I have probably ever spoken in my entire life. What exactly is this? My dad's jaw tightened defensively. That is absolutely none of your business. That is a private, legally binding document between your mother and me. It has my name in it, I replied, my voice dangerously steady. Exactly one time. In a tiny section about leftover, worthless junk. I'd say that makes it very much my business. My mom stepped forward, trying to defuse the bomb that had just gone off in her kitchen. She had that specific, pleading look on her face, the one she always gets when she is about to try and rewrite reality in real time to avoid conflict. Liam, honey, please calm down. You're taking this completely out of context. There is a lot of complicated nuance to modern estate planning, and you just wouldn't understand the financial strategy behind it. $850,000, I said loudly, the number hanging in the air like a physical weight. What part of $850,000 to Ethan and zero to me am I taking out of context? Mom, please, enlighten me. The kitchen got painfully quiet. The faulty faucet I had been in the middle of trying to fix was still dripping into the stainless steel basin. One heavy drop every 3 seconds. Plink, plink, plink. It sounded as loud as a judge's gavel in that suffocating silence. My dad aggressively crossed his arms over his chest. Your brother has a family to provide for, Liam. He's got massive corporate responsibilities, a huge mortgage on that house in Raleigh, and they are planning on having kids eventually. He needs the financial security. I have a family, I practically shouted, the years of suppressed anger finally bubbling over. I have a wife, I have a mortgage. I have a growing business with 8 full-time employees whose entire livelihoods depend entirely on me making payroll every Friday. That's different, my mom said quietly, looking down at her shoes. How? Tell me exactly how that is different? I demanded. She didn't answer. She just looked nervously at my dad, like she was waiting for him to handle the situation, the exact way she always looked at him when things got emotionally uncomfortable. Pass the baton. Let Robert deal with the messy feelings. My dad aggressively cleared his throat. Look, son. You've done very well for yourself with your little pipe business. You've always been the fiercely independent one. You didn't need our financial help to get where you are. Ethan is different. Ethan has had a much harder road. I almost laughed. I actually felt a dark, hysterical laugh building deep in my chest, and I had to physically swallow it down to keep from losing my mind. Ethan had a harder road? The guy with the fully funded out-of-state college degree, the expensive MBA they helped co-sign for, the cushy corporate VP job, the massive luxury house in Raleigh, and the insufferable wife with the imported quartz island? That Ethan? He had the harder road? Ethan drives an $80,000 luxury SUV, Dad, I said, my voice shaking with rage. That is entirely beside the point, Dad snapped. Ethan went on a 2-week luxury cruise to the Mediterranean last spring, I continued relentlessly. You two secretly helped pay for it. I know because Mom accidentally let it slip to Chloe at Easter, and Chloe didn't tell me until a week later because she was terrified it would start a massive fight. Well, here's the fight. My mom's face went completely pale. She hadn't known Chloe knew. She definitely hadn't known I knew. Ethan got the down payment for his massive house from you guys. I pushed forward, refusing to let them breathe. $75,000. I know the exact number because Brittany got drunk and bragged about it to Chloe's sister at a family barbecue last summer like it was just pocket change. Meanwhile, Chloe and I scraped together every single cent of our modest down payment entirely by ourselves. I worked 90-hour weeks, taking every emergency weekend plumbing call for 2 straight years. Chloe picked up exhausting freelance design projects until 2 a.m. every night. We didn't ask you for a single dime because we thought that's what you would respect. We thought you respected hard work. Turns out, what you actually respected was Ethan's shameless ability to beg. My dad stepped closer, pointing a finger at my chest. You don't know what the hell you're talking about, boy. Then explain it to me. I roared. Explain why Ethan gets $850,000 and I get personal effects as deemed appropriate. Explain it to me like I'm the dumb kid who wasn't smart enough for a university degree. Explain it real slow. That one landed hard. I saw it hit him right in the center of his chest, because those were the exact words he had used to describe me when I was 18 and told him I was going to a blue-collar trade school instead of a 4-year university. He had looked at me with pure disdain and said, well, I guess not everyone's cut out for the academic route. Some people just have to work with their hands. And then he had turned around and walked out of the room, no encouragement. No. I'm proud of you for finding a career. Just quiet, suffocating disappointment wrapped in a sentence perfectly designed to make me feel small and stupid. My mom started crying. Not big, dramatic, theatrical sobs. Just the quiet, manipulative kind of crying, where her chin trembles violently and she dabs at her eyes with whatever is in her hands. In this case, it was a cheap dish towel. And normally, for the past 32 years, that specific cry would have worked on me like magic. Normally, I would have immediately softened. I would have felt immense guilt. I would have said I was sorry for raising my voice. I would have hugged her. I would have told her I didn't mean it, that it was just the stress talking, and let's just forget the whole thing. I had been doing that exact toxic emotional dance for over 3 decades. Step 1. Discover something deeply hurtful they did. Step 2. Get rightfully angry. Step 3. Watch mom cry. Step 4. Apologize for having valid feelings. Step 5. Go home and pretend everything is perfectly fine until the next time they hurt me. But, not this time. The cycle broke right there on that cheap kitchen linoleum. I need you to answer me, I said, my voice dropping back to a terrifyingly calm whisper. My dad slowly sat down at the small kitchen table. He rubbed his face with both of his calloused hands, the exact way he does when he's trying to figure out how to spin a situation without technically lying. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes hard, and said something I will absolutely never forget as long as I live. Because Ethan is going to take care of us. And there it was. The ugly, transactional truth stripped of all the polite euphemisms, the fake justifications, and the dense estate planning jargon. They were making a financial investment in the son they expected a massive return from. Ethan had apparently promised to move them into an in-law suite in his big house in Raleigh when they got too old to care for themselves. Ethan was going to manage their medical care. Ethan was going to be the dutiful, wealthy son who showed up at holidays with beautiful grandchildren and endless gratitude. I was just the plumber. The blue-collar guy who fixes the sink for free and goes home to his modest life. Has Ethan actually agreed to this? I asked. My voice hollow. Dad looked away, staring at the grain of the wooden table. We've discussed it extensively. So Ethan knows about the will. It was silence. Ethan knows, I repeated, not a question this time. More silence, which was all the confirmation I needed. My own brother had known they were completely cutting me out of the family legacy, and he hadn't said a damn word. He had just smiled, drank beers with me, and let it happen. I slowly set the heavy stack of legal papers on the granite counter. I looked down at the sink. The specific basin wrench I had been looking for was sitting right there, resting on top of a stack of expired Bed Bath & Beyond coupons, right next to where the envelope had been hidden. I could have finished the plumbing job in exactly 5 minutes. I could have replaced the cartridge, tightened the valve, wiped everything down, and driven home. That's what the old Liam would have done. Fix the sink, swallow the immense pain, call Chloe on the way home, and spend the next 3 weeks silently resenting my life while pretending it didn't bother me. Instead, I picked up my heavy canvas tool bag from the floor. I slung it over my shoulder. I looked at my mom, who was still weeping into her dish towel, and my dad, who was still sitting stubbornly at the table looking at his hands. The internal cartridge in the faucet valve is shot. I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. You can get a replacement at the hardware store for about $12. YouTube has a great 10-minute tutorial video that will walk you right through the installation process. Good luck with your golden child. And I walked out. I drove home in total, deafening silence. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't call my wife. I just drove the dark streets of Charlotte with the windows rolled completely down, the cold night air hitting my face, while my brain frantically replayed every single moment of my entire life through a brutal new lens. Every childhood birthday where Ethan got the expensive new gaming console and I got socks. Every holiday dinner where Dad asked Ethan detailed questions about his corporate career trajectory, but never once asked about my company's revenue or expansion plans. Every time Mom introduced us to her country club friends and proudly said, "This is Ethan, he's an executive in Raleigh," and then vaguely gestured at me and said, "And this is Liam." Not Liam, the successful business owner. Not Liam who built a thriving company from nothing. Just Liam, period. When I finally got home, Chloe was sitting on our living room couch, working on her laptop. She took one look at my pale, devastated face and immediately slammed her laptop shut. What happened? Who died? I sat down heavily next to her and told her everything. Every single word. Every look. Every staggering number printed on that legal document. She didn't interrupt me. She didn't gasp or cry or say, "Oh my God," every 3 sentences the way people do in dramatic movies. She just listened intently, her eyes burning with a quiet, fierce anger. And when I was finally done talking, she sat in total silence for about 30 seconds, processing the magnitude of the betrayal. Then she reached out, grabbed my rough hand, squeezed it hard, and said 4 simple words. "We are done with them." And I know that sounds incredibly dramatic to some people. I know there are people reading this on Reddit who think that is a massive overreaction. That it's just money. That family blood is always more important than a financial inheritance. And maybe, in a healthy family, you're right. But here is the fundamental truth you have to understand. It was never actually about the money. I didn't need a single cent of their $850,000. I have my own money. I have been aggressively building my own financial security since I was 19 years old. It was about what that specific amount of money represented. It was a literal scoreboard. It was a legally binding document that stated, in black and white, notarized and filed away in a vault by an attorney, that my parents valued one of their sons at $850,000, and they valued the other son at whatever dusty, broken box of junk they didn't feel like hauling to the Goodwill donation center. That was 8 months ago. I haven't spoken a single word to my parents since that night. I haven't spoken a single word to Ethan since that night. And until about 3 weeks ago, absolutely none of them had tried to speak to me either. Update 1. The first few weeks after I walked out of my parents' kitchen were incredibly rough. I am not going to sugarcoat the psychological toll it took on me. I threw myself entirely into my plumbing business, working 14-hour days, taking every emergency call, doing rough-in piping for new construction until my hands bled. It's what I always do when I don't want to process negative emotions. I work until I am too physically exhausted to think. Chloe let me do it for about 10 days before she finally cornered me in the kitchen, took my keys away, and said, "You cannot outrun this trauma with a pipe wrench, Liam. You need to actually deal with it before it destroys you." She was right. She is almost always right, which is simultaneously the best and most annoying thing about being married to her. I finally swallowed my pride and found a therapist. I found a guy named Dr. Vance. He was in his late 50s, a former Marine combat veteran who transitioned into psychology. He was exactly the kind of guy I needed. He didn't let you ramble on for 45 minutes and then softly ask, "And how does that make you feel?" He would abruptly cut you off mid-sentence, lean forward, and say, "That is a fictional story you are telling yourself to protect your ego. What actually happened?" I liked him immediately. He didn't treat me like I was a broken, fragile victim. He treated me like I was a highly competent adult who had been operating under some severely faulty assumptions about his own family dynamic for 3 decades. Dr. Vance helped me clearly see something I hadn't been able to see on my own, through the fog of betrayal. The secret will wasn't the beginning of the problem, it was the final culmination. It was the end point of a lifetime of tiny, subconscious decisions my parents had made that all pointed in the exact same direction. I was always the low-maintenance kid. I was the one who didn't need help with homework, didn't cause problems at school, didn't ask for expensive toys, didn't ask for tuition money. And because I never asked for anything, they never offered anything. And because they never offered, they eventually entirely forgot that I might actually need something from them. Not their money, not their stuff, just the basic, fundamental acknowledgement that I mattered just as much as my older brother. The strangest thing about going completely no contact with your immediate family is that it creates this massive, echoing vacuum in your daily life. Suddenly, all these little exhausting routines you didn't even realize you hated are just gone. No more forced Sunday afternoon phone calls with mom where she would talk endlessly for 20 minutes about her hydrangeas and then immediately pivot to asking how Ethan's new promotion was going. No more dropping by dad's garage to help him fix a lawnmower he was pretending to work on just so he had an excuse to complain about politics. No more tense Thanksgiving dinners where I would sit at the far end of the table, passing the dinner rolls, watching Ethan hold court and brag about his stock portfolio, wondering why I had driven across town for this psychological torture. It is truly amazing how much free time and mental energy you get back when you finally stop performing for an audience that isn't even watching you. I poured all of that reclaimed time and energy directly into my business. I had been running things incredibly lean for years, doing a lot of the late-night scheduling, payroll, and invoicing myself, and it was becoming a massive bottleneck for growth. I finally did what I had been putting off for years. I hired a full-time office manager, a brilliant, no-nonsense woman named Sarah who had spent 10 years running operations for a massive commercial HVAC contractor. Sarah walked into my tiny office on her very first day, took one look at my chaotic filing system, which was essentially a series of plastic milk crates with labels made of ripped masking tape, and said, "Oh, honey, we are going to fix this disaster immediately." Within 3 months, Sarah had digitized our entire operation, set up proper automated invoicing, streamlined our dispatching, and freed me up to focus entirely on aggressively growing the business instead of drowning in administrative paperwork. I started bidding on massive commercial jobs. We landed a huge restaurant renovation downtown, a complex bathroom remodel for a high-end dental office, and then a massive new construction plumbing contract for a local brewery that was expanding its operations. Each job went flawlessly, and each one led directly to the next referral. By the end of January, 5 months after I had walked out of my parents' house, my business revenue had grown by a staggering 40%. I hired 3 more licensed plumbers. I bought 2 brand new, fully outfitted work vans. Chloe and I sat down one Saturday morning, looked closely at our finances, and realized we were in the absolute best financial position we had ever been in our entire lives. We weren't just comfortable anymore, we were incredibly solid. The kind of solid where you don't even flinch when a massive unexpected bill shows up in the mail. Chloe had her own amazing thing going, too. She had been doing freelance graphic design and brand consulting for years, picking up side projects here and there, and she finally decided to take a terrifying leap and go full-time. We converted our spare bedroom into a beautiful home office for her. She launched a stunning new portfolio website, and within a couple of months, she had more high-paying corporate clients than she could handle. We were becoming an unstoppable team in a way we had never been before. Two people building an empire together without the constant, draining background noise of a family that made me feel like I was never quite enough. I actually started sleeping better. I didn't even realize how poorly I had been sleeping my entire life until I started sleeping well. All those years of low-grade, simmering anxiety, wondering if my parents were proud of me, wondering if I was measuring up to Ethan's phantom success, wondering if I was still the disappointment. It had been sitting heavy in my chest like a jagged rock. I had gotten so used to carrying it that I forgot it was even there. And when I finally set it down and walked away, I felt like I had lost 100 pounds of stress overnight. Dr. Vance and I kept meeting every other week. We talked deeply about boundaries. We talked about how I had spent my entire adult life desperately trying to prove my worth to people who had already made up their minds about me decades ago. We talked about how my intense need to be useful, to be the reliable guy who shows up with a toolbox and fixes things, wasn't just a strong blue-collar work ethic. It was a deeply ingrained trauma response and survival strategy. My subconscious logic was, if I am useful, they will have to love me. If I am indispensable, they cannot ignore me. Except, they did ignore me. I was so incredibly useful that I had simply become invisible. I was just a tool they reached for when a pipe burst, and a tool they immediately put back in the dark drawer when the dirty job was done. I am not telling you all of this so you feel sorry for me. I am telling you this because it absolutely matters for what happened next. Around late February, I started hearing some very interesting things through the family grapevine. Chloe's sister is married to a guy who works in corporate finance, who happens to know a guy who works directly with Ethan's wife, Brittany. Small town networking at its absolute finest. The delivery system of the gossip was ridiculous, but the intel was highly reliable, and the news was incredibly juicy. Ethan was having massive money problems. And I don't mean the kind of minor problems where you have to cancel a few streaming subscriptions and eat at home more often. I mean the kind of catastrophic financial problems where the foundation of your entire fake life starts violently cracking. Apparently, Ethan's corporate tech company had gone through a brutal round of layoffs right before Thanksgiving. His VP position, whatever it actually was, had been restructured. That is corporate HR speak for, we absolutely do not need you, you contribute nothing of value, but we are going to pretend this was a strategic structural decision to avoid a lawsuit. He had eventually found another job, but it was a massive demotion, and it paid significantly less. And less does not go very far when your entire lifestyle is built on a towering house of cards made of maximum limit credit cards, 2 luxury car payments, and a mortgage on a Raleigh mansion you could barely afford in the first place. I also heard that Brittany was not handling the severe financial downgrade well at all. She had suddenly started posting constantly on social media about embracing the minimalist lifestyle and finding true joy in less, which, in my experience, is exactly what materialistic people do right before the repo man shows up to tow their Mercedes. There were massive arguments. The tension was bleeding into their social circles. That big, beautiful house in Raleigh was apparently feeling a lot like a prison when the final notices were piling up on that imported Italian marble island. And here is where the story gets really, truly interesting. Remember how my parents explicitly justified giving Ethan the entire $850,000 estate because he was going to take care of them in their old age? That was the grand deal. Almost $1 million in assets in exchange for future caregiving, future housing, and future gratitude. Well, the future arrived a lot faster than anyone anticipated. Dad's health had started to rapidly slip. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but his bad knee had deteriorated to the point where it was bone on bone, and he desperately needed a complex total knee replacement surgery. Furthermore, Mom's rheumatoid arthritis had flared up terribly in the cold winter months, making it incredibly hard for her to keep up with the maintenance of their house. They needed actual help. They needed real, physical, show up and do the hard work kind of help. And Ethan, from what I heard, was absolutely nowhere to be found. He was not showing up. He was too busy, too stressed with the new job, too far away in Raleigh, 2 times something. The golden son they had invested absolutely everything into was currently delivering roughly the exact same return on investment as a bankrupt cryptocurrency. I would be completely lying to you if I said I didn't feel a deep, dark sense of vindication hearing that. I wasn't happy they were suffering, exactly, but there is a very specific, grim satisfaction in watching the math violently not add up for people who tried to screw you over. They bet their entire future on one shiny horse, and that horse was currently struggling just to make his luxury SUV payment. Meanwhile, I was in the absolute best shape of my life. I had a therapist who was helping me understand my own mind. I had a wife who loved me fiercely without any conditions. I had a business that was exploding in revenue because I built it on actual hard work and integrity. I had everything I could ever need, and absolutely none of it had come from Robert and Martha. Then, on a rainy Wednesday night in late March, my cell phone rang. I looked down at the glowing screen and saw 2 words I hadn't seen in 8 months, Mom calling. I just stared at it. I let it ring. I watched it go to voicemail, and then I set the phone face down on the granite kitchen counter and stared at it like it was a live grenade with the pin half pulled. Chloe walked into the kitchen, took one look at my rigid posture, saw the phone, and sighed. Who was it? Your mom? She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. Are you going to listen to the voicemail? I don't know, I muttered, rubbing my temples. Yes, you do, she said softly. She was right. I was always going to listen to it. Not because I missed them, although, pathetically, some small, broken child part of my brain still did, but because I needed to know exactly what kind of desperate disaster had finally made them swallow their massive pride and pick up the phone after 8 months of dead silence. 8 months of not calling, not texting, not driving 20 minutes across Charlotte to knock on my door and say, hey, we made a huge mistake, we need to talk. I pressed play and put the voicemail on speakerphone. Mom's voice sounded incredibly shaky, much weaker than I remembered. She sounded older somehow, like the last 8 months had aged her 5 years. Liam, honey. It's Mom. I know it's been a long while, and I know some very harsh things were said that probably shouldn't have been said, and I know you're very upset. I really need to talk to you. Your father's knee surgery is scheduled for next month, and we could really use some help around the house preparing for it. And, well, there are some other important things we should probably discuss. Please, call me back. I love you. I replayed the message twice. Not because I missed any words, but because I wanted to mathematically analyze the sheer audacity of it. I wanted to make sure I had heard exactly what I thought I heard. And I had. There was absolutely no apology in that message. There was no acknowledgement of the horrific financial and emotional betrayal they had committed. There was no, we were completely wrong. It was just passive language. Things were said, and, you're upset, and, we need help. It was the classic Martha playbook. Rewrite the devastating conflict as a simple mutual misunderstanding. Frame my highly justified, righteous anger as me just being overly emotional. And then, brilliantly, slide the real demand for free labor in at the very end like it's just a casual afterthought. Oh, and by the way, the golden child abandoned us, so we need the plumber to come take care of us. How incredibly convenient. I didn't call her back that night. Or the next day. Or the day after that. I went to see Dr. Vance for my scheduled session and played the voicemail for him. I laid out the entire current situation, the upcoming knee surgery, Ethan's secret financial collapse, the blatant manipulation in the voicemail. All of it. He listened intently, leaning back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers. And then he asked me one piercing question. What do you actually want from this, Liam? I sat there and thought about it for a long time. The answer genuinely surprised me. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to maliciously punish them. I definitely didn't want a single dollar of their money. What I wanted was for them to say it. I wanted them to acknowledge, out loud, in plain, undeniable English, that they had treated me like absolute garbage. I wanted them to admit that the will wasn't just an estate document, it was a final verdict on my worth, and that they were dead wrong. Okay, Dr. Vance said, nodding slowly. So, what is your tactical plan? I don't have one yet, I admitted. Yes, you do. He smiled slightly. Everyone in my life apparently knows me better than I know myself. Over the next week, I did something I probably should have done 8 months ago. I called a lawyer. Not because I was going to sue my own parents. You can't sue someone for being a terrible parent, but because I wanted to understand exactly what my legal standing was before I walked into a war zone. My old buddy Marcus from high school had gone to law school and was now a highly successful estate and probate attorney in Charlotte. I called him up, gave him the broad strokes of the mess, and asked if I could buy him a beer and some barbecue. We met at a loud pulled pork joint off South Boulevard. I laid out exactly what I had read in the trust documents, the $850,000 allocation to Ethan, and the personal effects clause. Marcus listened quietly while destroying a massive plate of brisket. Legally speaking, Marcus said, wiping sauce off his chin, your parents are perfectly within their rights to leave their estate to whoever they want. There is zero legal obligation in North Carolina to split assets evenly among children. You don't have a claim to contest the will just because it's unfair. I know that, I said, that's not why I'm asking. But here is what is highly interesting. Marcus continued, leaning in. The massive down payment they gave Ethan, the luxury cruise they paid for those financial gifts establish a clear, documented pattern of unequal distribution. And if your parents legally structured the entire estate trust around Ethan acting as their primary caretaker, and Ethan is now defaulting on that verbal or written agreement because he's broke and absent, then your parents have a massive legal and financial problem. Ethan has a problem. But legally, none of it is your problem, Liam. You are entirely insulated. You hold all the cards because you want nothing. I thanked Marcus, paid the tab, and drove home with my brain spinning. I held all the cards. The desperate voicemails from Mom kept coming, about one every 3 days. Each message was a little more frantic and urgent than the last. Dad's surgery was now only 2 weeks away. The house desperately needed winterizing. The gutters were overflowing and damaging the roof. The downstairs bathroom toilet was leaking now, too. It was as if my parents' entire physical house had magically decided to violently fall apart the exact moment I stopped being their free, on-call maintenance service. And then, the cherry on top, Ethan called me. First time in 8 months. I didn't answer, obviously, but the voicemail he left was an absolute masterpiece of toxic projection and passive aggression. Hey man, it's Ethan. Listen, Mom and Dad are really struggling right now, and I think it's pretty incredibly selfish that you've been ghosting them for almost a year over some legal paperwork you weren't even supposed to snoop and find. They're getting old, Liam. They need their family right now. Stop throwing a tantrum. Call them back, and call me back, too. We need to coordinate this. F. 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 Selfish. He actually called me selfish. The guy who was legally promised $850,000 called the guy who was getting a box of old sweaters selfish for being upset about it. That is literally like a bank robber calling the security guard rude for trying to lock the vault. I played the voicemail for Chloe. She listened to it once, let out a harsh laugh, shook her head, and said, "He doesn't even realize he just completely proved your point." She was exactly right. Ethan's entire message was entirely focused on what I should be doing for times them, not what they had done to times me, not what the will said, not what was fair or right. Just, you need to show up and be a useful tool again so I don't have to. Same exact script, different actor. I finally decided I was going to call Mom back, but I was going to do it entirely on my terms. I wasn't going to show up at their house with a ladder, clean their gutters, play the good, obedient son, and pretend everything was fine. I was going to have a real, brutal, face-to-face conversation. A sit down, look them in the eye, no more bullshit conversation. And I demanded that Ethan be there, too, because this wasn't just between me and my parents anymore. This was about the entire toxic family system that had been humming along perfectly for decades with my neck acting as the stepping stone. I called Mom on a Saturday morning. She picked up on the very first ring, which told me she had been sitting by the phone waiting. "Liam?" she gasped. "Oh, honey, I am so glad you finally called. Your father and I have been so worried sick about you. Are you okay? We miss you so much." "I'm fine, Mom," I said, my voice completely flat. "I want to talk. All of us. You, Dad, me, and Ethan. At your house." There was a heavy pause on the line. "Ethan?" she asked nervously. "Why does Ethan need to be there?" "Because this involves all of us," I said coldly. "Can you set it up for next Saturday at noon?" Another pause, much longer this time. I could hear Dad's gruff voice in the background, muffled, asking who she was talking to. I'll talk to your brother," she finally stammered. "Saturday should work. Your father's surgery isn't until the following Monday, so he'll definitely be here." "Good," I said. "And Mom? Let me be very clear. I am not bringing my tool bag. I am not coming to fix your leaky toilet or your gutters. I am coming to talk." Silence. "I'll see you Saturday," I said, and hung up. Update 2. I spent the entire next week mentally preparing. I wasn't rehearsing some big, dramatic movie speech. I was just getting crystal clear in my own head about what I needed to say, what boundaries I was going to enforce, and what I needed to hear from them to ever move forward. Dr. Vance helped me role-play the conversation. Chloe helped keep me grounded. Marcus's legal advice sat in the back of my mind like a steel safety net I hoped I wouldn't need to deploy. Saturday morning arrived. I put on a clean, fitted button-down shirt, dark jeans, and my good leather boots. I wasn't dressing up to impress them. I was dressing to feel like myself, solid, successful, put together. Chloe held my face in both of her hands before I walked out the door, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "Do not dare apologize for a single thing you feel today. You are the one who is owed." I got into my truck and drove to my parents' house. Ethan's luxury SUV was already parked in the driveway. It was freshly washed, of course. I parked right behind it, blocking him in, took a massive deep breath, and walked up to the front door. I didn't knock. I just turned the knob and walked right in, because I wasn't a polite guest. I was their son, whether they treated me like one or not. They were all gathered in the living room. Dad was sitting in his worn recliner with his bad knee propped up on a pillow. Mom was sitting rigidly on the edge of the floral couch with her hands folded tight in her lap. Ethan was standing awkwardly by the brick fireplace with his arms aggressively crossed across his chest, looking exactly like a guy who thought he was about to easily win an argument he didn't realize he had already completely lost. Nobody said hello. The tension in the room was so thick you could have cut it with a pipe cutter. I'd have walked in, didn't offer a handshake to anyone, sat down heavily in the armchair by the front window, and looked slowly at all three of them. "Somebody want to start?" I asked quietly. Ethan jumped in first. Of course, he did. He always had to control the narrative. "Yeah, I'll start," he snapped, taking a step forward. "You have been acting like an absolute child for 8 months, Liam. Mom and Dad are dealing with real, serious medical problems right now, and you're throwing a massive temper tantrum and pouting because you didn't like what you snooped and found in a private legal document. Grow the hell up and help your family." I let his words hang in the air for a long 5 seconds. I didn't react. I didn't yell. I just stared at him, until he shifted uncomfortably. Then I looked at my parents. "Is that what you told him? That I'm just pouting?" "That's exactly what it looks like from where I'm standing," Ethan interrupted again. I slowly turned my head back to my brother. "You are standing in a paid-off house that is legally guaranteed to become 100% yours," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Along with $850,000 in liquid assets, a massive brokerage account, and a beautiful piece of land in Asheville. So, maybe your standing position isn't the most objective vantage point for calling someone selfish, Ethan." Ethan's jaw shifted. His eyes darted nervously to Dad. Dad was staring intensely at the carpet, refusing to make eye contact with me. "Did you know about the exact terms of the will, Ethan?" I asked him directly, pinning him down. He didn't answer right away. He looked at Mom, then back to me. "Yeah," he finally muttered defensively. "I knew. Dad and I discussed the estate planning last summer before the lawyers finalized it." "And you didn't think to maybe bring it up with your brother?" I asked. "It wasn't my place to discuss their finances," he shot back. "It wasn't your place to tell me," I repeated slowly, nodding, "but it was absolutely your place to silently take all the money and let me get a box of old photo albums." Mom finally leaned forward, her voice shaking. "Liam, please. Your father and I made that difficult decision for very practical, logical reasons. Ethan agreed to be our primary caretaker when the time comes. That is a massive, significant life commitment, and we felt it was only fair to reflect that burden in the estate plan." I nodded slowly, acting like I was absorbing this profound wisdom. "Okay, that makes sense. So, let me ask you a very practical question, Mom. In the last 8 months since I walked out, how many times has Ethan driven down from Raleigh to help you maintain this house?" Dead silence. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly. "How many times has Ethan come over to help Dad prep the house for his knee surgery? To clean the overflowing gutters? To fix the leaking downstairs toilet? To do literally any of the dirty, physical things I used to do for free, every single week, for a decade, without ever being asked, and without ever being included in any $1 million estate plan?" Mom's chin started trembling violently. Dad was still stubbornly staring at the floor. Ethan shifted his weight from foot to foot, his face flushing red. "I'll answer for you," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "Based on what I know, Ethan has been over here exactly 3 times since September. 3 times in 8 months. And 2 of those times were Thanksgiving and Christmas, which he had to show up to anyway to get his free meal." Ethan exploded. "I have been going through a massive crisis, Liam. I lost my VP job. Brittany and I are dealing with severe financial issues, and I didn't ask about your corporate problems, Ethan," I roared, standing up from the chair. The sudden movement made Dad flinch. "I asked about your promise. You legally traded $850,000 for the promise of taking care of Mom and Dad. You took the $75,000 down payment. You took the Mediterranean cruise. And now that the absolute bare minimum obligation is finally real, now that Dad actually needs you to do some heavy lifting, you're suddenly too busy and going through a tough time." The room went completely, terrifyingly quiet. The dripping faucet in the kitchen down the hall seemed to echo. Nobody had fixed it. It had been dripping for 8 months. I slowly turned to my dad. He still hadn't looked up. "Dad," I commanded, "look at me." He slowly raised his head. His eyes were red and wet. I don't think I had ever seen my father cry in my entire life. Not at his own parents' funerals. Not at my wedding. Never. "Why?" I asked, my voice finally breaking, all the anger draining out of me, leaving only the raw, 30-year-old hurt. "Forget the estate plan. Forget the $850,000. Forget the house. Just tell me why. Why was it always Ethan? Why was I always the afterthought? What the hell did I do wrong?" Dad's mouth opened and closed. He looked like an old, exhausted man who had been carrying a massive, heavy secret for 30 years and had just realized it was crushing him to death. "You didn't do anything wrong, Liam," he croaked, his voice rough as sandpaper. You were always so incredibly capable. From the time you were a little boy, you just figured things out on your own. You fixed your own bikes. You found your own jobs. You didn't need us to survive. You didn't need us the way Ethan constantly needed us to bail him out. And somewhere along the way, your mother and I completely confused you. Times not needing us, times with you, times not wanting us. We leaned all our attention toward the son who constantly demanded it, because it made us feel important. That is the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard, I said, tears finally spiking in my own eyes. That's not fair. I know it's not, Dad sobbed, burying his face in his hands. I know. I did need you. I yelled, my voice cracking. I just showed it differently. I showed it by coming over here every single week to fix your house. I showed it by calling Mom every Sunday. I showed it by showing up to every holiday dinner, even though I felt completely invisible at the table. That was me trying to earn your love, and you just took the free labor and didn't see me at all. Mom was fully, hysterically crying now. Not the manipulative, performative crying from 8 months ago. This was real, ugly, soul-deep crying. Dad wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, looking at me with pure devastation. I see it now, son. God help me, I see it now. And I am so sorry. Then I need you to say it out loud, I demanded, standing my ground. Say that what you did to me was wrong. He took a shaky, rattling breath. What we did was unforgivable. The will was wrong. The way we treated you, your whole life was wrong. All of it was wrong. And I am so sorry, Liam, I am so sorry I made you feel like you mattered less than your brother. You are twice the man I am. Mom managed to choke out, I'm so sorry my baby. I was so terrified to call you because I thought you would never, ever forgive us. I'm not interested in never forgiving you, I said softly, the heavy rock finally lifting out of my chest. I'm interested in you finally doing something to fix it. I turned slowly to Ethan. He looked incredibly small. Not physically, but in the way a person looks when the arrogant narrative they've been living inside their entire life suddenly collapses around them. You took the deal, I said to him, my voice devoid of anger, just stating a sad fact. You knew they were cutting your own brother out entirely, and you didn't say a damn word to stop it. I didn't think. He started to say, but I cut him off. Do not say it wasn't your place. I am your brother. We shared a room for 10 years. It was absolutely your place to protect me. Ethan didn't say anything for a long time. He just stared at the floor. Then his eyes got red, his shoulders slumped, and his voice cracked. You're right. It was a completely cowardly, crappy thing to do. I was greedy, I was drowning in debt, and I saw a way out, and I threw you under the bus. I should have said something. I am so sorry, Liam. I looked at him. I actually believed him. Not because his words were perfectly crafted, but because he looked like a broken guy who had just realized the golden pedestal he had been standing on his whole life was actually made of cheap glass, and it had just shattered. We stayed in that living room and talked for another 3 hours. We talked more honestly and brutally than my family had ever talked about anything in 30 years. Dad completely agreed to tear up the will and have Marcus revise the estate plan to split absolutely everything 50-50. Not because I demanded the money, I made it very clear I didn't need it, but because Dad insisted it was the only right thing to do to restore balance. Mom agreed to start actually asking about Chloe's business and my life, instead of just treating me like a handyman. Ethan and I agreed to try and start fresh, as equals. I didn't fix the leaking toilet or the sink that day. I told Dad I would come back the following Thursday and do it, and I did. But that time, he didn't sit in the living room watching TV. He pulled up a chair and sat in the kitchen with me while I worked. He handed me the wrenches. He asked me detailed questions about my commercial contracts, what my expansion plans were for the business, and whether I was truly happy. My father asked me if I was happy. I was 32 years old, and that was the very first time he had ever asked me that question. That was 2 months ago. Things seemed to be healing. Dad had his massive knee surgery, and Chloe and I stepped up. We helped during the brutal first 2 weeks of recovery. Surprisingly, Ethan actually showed up too. He drove down from Raleigh 3 times a week. We took shifts. We brought them hot food. We helped Dad with his physical therapy exercises. We did the small, exhausting stuff that real families are supposed to do, not because of a secret contract in a manila envelope but because it was just the right thing to do. But remember when I said Ethan was having massive financial problems? Remember when I told you this story had a twist? Here is what happened last week. Because Dad was heavily medicated on painkillers and Mom was exhausted from being a full-time nurse, I offered to help them sort through their massive pile of mail and manage their household bills for a few weeks. I was sitting at their dining room table, opening water bills and hospital statements, when I came across a thick, plain white envelope from a major national bank. It was marked Times Urgent, Action Required. I assumed it was a medical bill. I opened it. My blood instantly ran ice cold. It wasn't a medical bill. It was a formal notice of intent to foreclose. I stared at the paper, my brain refusing to process the words. I dug through the rest of the disorganized mail pile and found 2 more letters from the same bank. I spent the next 2 hours making phone calls, pulling property records online, and piecing together a terrifying, devastating puzzle. The $850,000 estate? The paid-off brick house? The beautiful mutual funds? It was all a complete mirage. It didn't exist anymore. 10 months ago, right around the time Ethan lost his VP job and started drowning in debt, and exactly 2 months times before the new will was drafted, Ethan had come to my parents begging for a lifeline. He had convinced them to co-sign a massive $250,000 home equity line of credit HELOC against their completely paid-off house. He told them he needed the capital to invest in a highly lucrative tech startup that would guarantee their retirement. It was a complete lie. There was no startup. Ethan took the $250,000 and used it to quietly pay off his massive credit card debts, cover the mortgage on his Raleigh mansion, and fund Brittany's lavish lifestyle for the past 10 months while he was unemployed. He had drained the HELOC completely dry. And worse, he hadn't made a single monthly payment on the loan in over 90 days. The bank was legally initiating foreclosure on my parents' home. Ethan's grand master plan to take care of them in exchange for the estate was actually a desperate, sociopathic cover-up. He manipulated them into changing the will so that when they eventually died, he would inherit the house, sell it, pay off the massive secret HELOC he took out, and hide his financial crimes forever. He literally stole their entire net worth while they were still alive, and left them holding a ticking time bomb. I didn't yell, I didn't scream, I just calmly called Marcus, my lawyer friend. Then, I called Ethan and told him to get down to Charlotte immediately because Dad had a medical emergency. Ethan walked through the front door 2 hours later, looking panicked. I was sitting at the dining room table with the foreclosure notices spread out like a royal flush. Mom and Dad were sitting next to me, completely pale, shaking, looking at Ethan like they didn't even recognize him. "What is this?" Ethan stammered, his eyes locking onto the bank logos. "This," I said, my voice eerily calm, "is elder financial abuse. It's fraud. And it's the end of your life as you know it." The confrontation was brutal. Ethan completely broke down. He fell to his knees, sobbing hysterically, admitting everything. He said he was going to pay it back, that he just needed more time, that the job market was tough. Dad literally threw a glass across the room. Mom had to be physically held back by Chloe. The golden child hadn't just disappointed them, he had actively bankrupted them. They were in their late 60s, recovering from major surgery, and they were about to be homeless. But I had already made a plan with Marcus. "Here is what is going to happen," I told Ethan, standing over him while he cried on the floor. "You are going to sign a legally binding document relinquishing any and all future claims to this estate, this family, or anything Mom and Dad own. If you ever ask them for a single dollar again, if you ever contact them asking for a loan, I will personally hand this massive paper trail of financial fraud over to the district attorney and I will make sure you go to federal prison. Do you understand me?" He nodded frantically, sobbing. I kicked him out of the house. I haven't seen him since. I heard through the grapevine that Brittany filed for divorce 2 days later when she found out the money was truly gone. As for my parents, they were shattered. But I didn't let them lose their home. I took a massive chunk of the profits from my expanding commercial plumbing business, and my LLC officially bought their debt directly from the bank. I paid off the $250,000 HELOC in full to stop the foreclosure. But I didn't do it as a gift. I'm not a fool anymore. In exchange for saving them from literal homelessness, my parents legally signed the deed of the house over to my LLC. The house belongs entirely to me now. My parents live there rent-free for the rest of their lives, and I cover the taxes and maintenance, but they are legally my tenants. I control the asset. I control the narrative. Last weekend, Dad insisted on coming down to my commercial plumbing shop for the first time ever. He walked with a cane, his new knee still stiff. In 15 years of me running a business, my father had never once set foot in the place where I actually worked. He looked at the fleet of branded vans, the massive tool racks, the bustling office where Sarah was dispatching crews, and the giant whiteboard where we schedule 6-figure commercial jobs. He looked at me, tears in his eyes, and said, "You built all of this with your own 2 hands." "Yeah, Dad," I said quietly. "I built all this." He nodded, leaning heavily on his cane. And then he said something that finally closed the 30-year loop in my brain. "I am so incredibly proud of you, Liam. You saved us." I should have seen it a long time ago. So, that is my chaotic Reddit story. I found a secret envelope in a junk drawer that told me my parents had a price tag for each of their sons, and mine was marked 0. I walked out, I rebuilt my mind, and when their golden child inevitably burned their entire world to the ground, I didn't come back with vengeance, I came back with absolute, unbreakable power. If you are the kid in your family who always got less, even though you gave so much more, I want you to know something very important. Your worth is not determined by the blind people who couldn't see it. Build your own table. Build your own empire. And if they ever desperately want a seat at it, make sure you own the entire building first. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching.